Welcome, everybody. We are just letting a few more folks join, and we'll kick it off here in about 2 minutes.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes,
Outstanding, thank you. Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're really glad that you're here with us today. Today we've got a great session lined up, especially for those of us who are looking to get more value from our Power Platform investments while keeping security top of mind. As many of you know, the Power Platform is helping organizations tackle their backlog faster than ever by empowering citizen developers to build solutions with low code. But as more folks move across the business, they start creating apps, copilots, agents. The big question becomes, how do we make sure security keeps up? Today, we're going to dive into exactly that. We'll hear how leading health organizations are thinking about security at scale, what's working for them, what's changing with the rise of GenAI agents, and what you might want to consider to shape your own strategy. So get comfortable, bring your questions, and let's jump in. Before we do all that, let me just introduce the folks on the team who are going to be talking about security today. I'm going to introduce myself and go first. Abhijit Premkumar, I'm a low-code technical specialist, and I work in the healthcare and life sciences division at Microsoft. Been here for a few years, been in the healthcare space for about 20 years. And with me, I have a few of my colleagues. And Liz Vilches, she's a global black belt. Liz, would you like to introduce yourself really quick?
Yes, thank you, Abhijit. So hi, everybody. Great to be here with you today. My name is Liz Vilches, and I'm a subject matter expert with Microsoft. My focus is on our low-code solutions, but I have an expertise in governance and especially in regulatory industries, how to enable these tools for broader usage across an organization. And happy to be here with you today.
Thank you. And with us, we have Kayla Underkoffler. Hopefully I've pronounced your name correctly. Kayla, would you mind giving us a quick intro and who you represent?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm Kayla Underkoffler, lead security engineer in the CTO office with Zenity, and we are all about AI agent security, especially focusing in with low-code, no-code, and business innovation platforms, and helping businesses be able to adopt these technologies and roll them out in their organizations to gain all the efficiencies and do that in a secure way. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about the security components from what I see in the industry and what we see as Zenity as well.
Awesome. So for the agenda, I think we're going to take it away and kind of hand it over to Liz. So Liz, I think you had a question. You were wondering, right? Why are we talking about this now? Maybe you want to expand on that, and let's see what you have. In what you have to kind of discuss.
Yeah, I think, one of the reasons that we decided to have a webinar on this topic, it's because with agents, the nature of agents is really changing three key things when it comes to building solutions. Number one is changing how we build them, right? Individuals, people are no longer the only ones that can create solutions. Some of that work is now being passed on to an agent or AI that takes action on your behalf to create things. And part of it is business solutions, right? So that how we build is changing. The second piece is how we interact with these solutions, right? So again, it's something that you're not just putting in information and getting some type of output, you're handing it off to an agent that now takes additional action on your behalf, and you may not know exactly what that is. You are getting an output, but you don't always see all the steps that take place. And the third is that because of the autonomy and the responsibility we're giving to agents and building solutions and getting answers, it's important that we rethink how we enable security for these agents. So in the past, it's been solutions that they are more prescriptive. You decide exactly how that solution is going to behave, the steps, the data, the access that it has. Now agents have the ability to reason. They have discretion on how they're going to go about solving things. And so you need to ensure that the actions that are taking follow security protocols, right? And that they are not moving data to places that or to individuals that shouldn't have it, and that you know what actions that they're taking. I think one other thing that is new as it relates to security is that because solutions were prescriptive, you designed them step by step. Um, you did not have to guess the intent of what a solution is doing. Now agents have the ability to decide on their own, and you have to decide, is their intent a good intent or is it a bad intent, right? Because as much as we're using agents to drive value in our business, there's also people that are using them to do bad things and to extract data from organizations. And so we have to capture that intent in the moment that the agent is taking action, and that is new. We have not seen that before. And so security starts to become very important. We have to think about it before we create the agent, and we have to put monitoring and controls in place so that we're tracking what's happening in the moment that agent is taking action. And so that's why I think it's critical if we're going to be moving in this direction, right, and building solutions, that we think about that and that we start to take on more of an understanding on how security plays into these solutions.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. Now let me kind of shine the spotlight onto Kayla. Kayla, you've been working in this space for a long time. You've been in security forever, it seems like. So in your own words, define for us what an agent is and what it means in the context of AI. And maybe we'll kind of throw a few more questions at you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Liz just gave a fantastic overview of what makes something truly agentic. We really have a pretty, as of today, strict definition for what is an agent, and that it must have the reasoning and planning capabilities that that the foundational LLMs and the models have, and then it also has to have access to tools, and it has to have the autonomy to be able to invoke those tools in whatever way it needs to in order to get the job done. So it's still following the goals that were set for it in the beginning and how you're building this. Like Liz was talking about the intent of what it's supposed to do, but it needs to be able to reason and act autonomously and invoke the tools you've given it access to achieve that goal. So that's like one of the main components of, or the main definition around an agent. And when we think about them, they inherit all of the capabilities as well as the risks of the underlying foundational model and the traditional Gen AI capabilities. It's just now we take it a step further with autonomy.
Okay. That kind of makes sense. So what makes agentic AI different from traditional models? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. So like I said, it's all built on top of a model. So when you're building your agent, you're going to we're talking about, Copilot Studio, for example. That's sitting on top of a foundational AI model that Microsoft is maintaining, and it's a part of the core components that you don't necessarily have to worry about as a builder of an agent, right? So we're adopting all the risks of those components, but it's really a shared responsibility model. So there's a lot that comes into play for who is securing what component throughout the entire system. And so when we focus in on the agent, which is what we all have most easily at our fingertips now with the awesome capabilities of Copilot Studios and M365 Copilot and all of that, you are looking at the rest of the story. So, for example, we all know that you have hallucinations, right? That's like one of the core risks of AI, using GenAI in general. And when we talk about hallucinations with agents, the problem here is that the hallucination occurs. The agent is now taking action based off of incorrect answers or inputs. And then now you chain together multiple agents and you can have cascading hallucinations. So now you're talking about the first agent had a hallucination, made up an answer, it was not the correct answer, but it passed that as an input to the second agent in line for a complete system. And then you're going to have downstream effects that you need to account for that type of risk in the situation. So that's one example of how agentic risk expands on the traditional risks we understand at the model layer, and maximizes it, really.
Interesting. So, are you able to talk a little bit about the risks specific to agentic AI and how they kind of differ from traditional security risks today?
Yeah, and so I just
Yeah.
want to highlight one other thing so that Kayla mentioned before, right? When we talk about traditional AI models, you are getting, information. It's able to interpret the information that you feed it, whether it's text, whether it's images, whether it's voice, right? It can interpret what's happened and give you some sort of output. When we talk about agentic, you're taking that output and now you're allowing the model to take an action and to propagate it a lot faster than a traditional AI model would, because that really relies on you to decide what you do with it. And so again, it's important that we're monitoring what is happening with these outputs and that it's doing what you want it to do for your organization.
Yeah, definitely agree with that, Liz. And I think that's part of, we're going to talk a little bit later on about really getting into, use cases and making sure you understand exactly what you want out of your agentic build when you do that and why that's so critical to security strategies. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But Abhijit, to go back to some very specific risks, we at Zenity, we categorize agentic risk in two main buckets. And these are, we call them build time and time risks. So build time risks are pretty familiar to we're used to today with how we're building agents and putting them together. So you're looking at things like authentication failures and authorization misuse. So the choices that you're making when you're building this thing result in bad things that can happen later on down the road, like insecurity speak, we call that by attack surface, increasing the attack surface based on build time decisions you're making. But then we also have those unique agentic risks. We often put those into the runtime bucket. That you're talking about curious AI, which is what I just talked about with hallucinations. You have prompt injections. You can have both direct indirect prompt injections, jailbreaking. In the end, this all can result in sensitive data exfiltration. Like all of those things are a result of risk in either build time or run time. And that's why we break these out into different buckets, because we're going to handle them a little differently throughout the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, and I think So one thing to highlight in this difference that Kayla is mentioning between build time and runtime, what I've seen with my customers, a lot of them in financial services and healthcare, is that often how an organization goes about addressing that, it's often build time sits within the IT teams that are setting up those data policies and authorization and who can leverage a solution, who can build a solution. But then a lot of the runtime security features, they tend to sit with the security office. And they've often been at odds, or they may not be speaking the same language. But now to really build a solution, these two teams have to begin to come together and understand what they're each doing to make sure you're addressing both types of risk when you create these agentic solutions.
Point of interest, Kayla, you might want to turn off your video feed. I think your Wi-Fi is glitching.
Sorry.
No worries. Might improve the performance a little bit.
Okay.
So back to risk. I mean, that was a lot of valuable discussion. So from a security and technical standpoint, how would you propose risk be reduced or even mitigated? Do you have thoughts around that?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So, when it comes to runtime risks, and just to kind of give a little more context so that we truly understand the difference between the build time and the run time. So I was saying, the build time are the choices that we're making as we go in and build this thing, build time risks, right? So the choices that we make to create this agent, that is what a build time risk is. Now, when we talk about runtime, I kind of like to relate it to working with your vehicle, right? With a car. So when you take your car to the mechanic because there is an issue, they're going to ask you to turn the car on, pop the hood. And it's because the issues look different when the vehicle is running than they do when it is static, when it's just sitting there. This is the same thing that we see in a lot of like traditional applications, yes, but it makes something completely different. It makes a completely different picture when we're talking about agentic runtime and what that's doing because of the non-deterministic nature. Like the agent is choosing it via its reasoning and planning, it's choosing the path that it wants to take. So when we're talking about how can we reduce this risk, I think the big thing to call out first is that risks like prompt injection which is one of the key runtime risks, we cannot eliminate prompt injection. That is an inherent vulnerability in AI. It's the way we have built AI with natural human processing language, and we're using that capability, which means that the model is really unable to with the right prompt, right, tell the difference between what is a good order and what is not a good order. So we cannot eliminate this risk. It's inherent in the technology, which means we have to manage it. We have to instill defense in depth all the way along the chain so that we can be watching what the agent is doing in the background. What actions is it taking? What flows is it working with? How is it working its way through, the Power Platform background, to use, like familiar language for all of us, to get the job done? What data is it interacting with and how? If we watch those steps and we're measuring against what the intent of this agent is, and then now what it's actually doing in runtime, we can then detect and respond to that. So that's how we really manage a lot of the runtime risk, for that matter, not just prompt injection. We have to watch the whole chain. We have to have defense in depth, and we're monitoring and detecting and responding where we need to in order to address concerns as they're arising. So the build time risk is a little different. That is a lot of that is how we address our overall security strategy and our security plans, like approved building standards and stuff like that. But it is very interesting that now that we've started to get into the runtime capabilities for agents, this management of risk is taking on a much more active security posture. And like Liz was saying, this is the type of stuff that you're typically going to work with a security operations team or possibly an incident response team in order to monitor this type of action, which really is going to bring a colliding of worlds together.
Wow, that was yeah, that was pretty profound. So from an operational standpoint, if I were to say to customers, I'd like to help you put a security strategy around together for agentic AI, what would be some of the core components?
Yeah, security strategies are critical, and it's the strategy behind your program. And there are some key components, and it really all starts with, because we're talking about agentic AI, I'm going to really focus on that. The use case is critical for agentic AI. You cannot really build a proper security strategy for how you're going to use this without understanding what the use cases are. And the use case is going to really define the goals and the key stakeholders and the users and the data. All of that will then inform the rest of the security strategy. So once you have your use cases outlined, then you're getting into some of the more traditional security strategy components, right? Which starts with things like a mission statement. And I know that sounds super, like soft skills, like that's not a real technical foundation. It sets the direction of your program. And if you don't have a mission, how are you going to be able to enforce the technical guardrails you put in place? So the mission of your security program is critical for the follow-on components. So once you have that in place, then you also need to start building out those technical details and guardrails that enforce the mission. So you're going to start with things like you're going to have an established environmental policy or acceptable use policy. What are people allowed to do in these environments? Is it different per environment? So like acceptable use is a top level policy you're going to need to build out. Then underneath that, there's going to be technical details and guardrails like authentication requirements and secure data handling. What are the encryption requirements that you have? What's the data management? Like what data can you interact with within these environments? And what's the access guidelines? Can guests be in here? How many privileged users are allowed to interact with these agents? You have to set those in your standard. And then you're also going to put in the technical guardrails from the beginning to enforce policies where you can. And this is really important because the fewer the fewer room or the fewer opportunities you give citizen developers or anybody for that matter to make poor build choice decisions, the better. So where you can set policy at the high levels, environmental level, do so, because it just makes building secure applications that much easier on your end users, which is really what you want. And then as you're going through this process, you're going to need to identify like, where do I need to bring in a third-party tool in order to accomplish this one technical control or these technical controls, and make sure you have that mapped out. And one of the other things that I think is really important here, as a call out, is obviously we're talking to the healthcare industry here. Regulation, very important. The state of regulation for AI and agentic AI especially is very much in flux right now. So we don't know what the end state is going to be for regulation around what these environments need to look like. We're getting there. There's stuff in progress, but nothing finalized yet. So the one thing that I would say is as you're going about building your use case and building your security strategy and then getting this stuff actually implemented, because there is such an emphasis on transparency for AI and agentic AI especially, you need to document and make sure you're keeping track of all of these components and the use cases and how this is going to work and the data it's working with as you go. don't wait until the end, because we don't know what regulation is going to look like tomorrow. And if you're starting to build this today, start with your documentation now, because that's just going to help you as regulations start to get built out.
So, I mean, that all makes sense. And I noticed you brought up use cases as being the linchpin around where everything hangs when it comes to a security strategy. So some of our customers are asking us, hey, we have a couple of use cases, and one of them is, well, could we have agents assisting doctors by analyzing patient data, whether it's labs, imaging, history, and suggest potential diagnosis or treatments? And then some of our pharma customers are saying, hey, can we have agents that are used in analyzing research for development of new drugs? So from a risk perspective, with agentic AI, what's your thought process? Where do we land? How do we go forward?
Yeah. So the critical component of any use case we're going to be looking at here really starts with the data. What data are you interacting with? If it is something that you know is going to fall within regulation, so health data, like actually working with patients and the things that you know are going to be regulated. And then also I would throw in there, because we talked about like the research and development side of things, critical data just to your business, anything you consider critical, knowing that that data is going to be in scope for whatever requirements you have in place, first and foremost, is all a part of that use case, setting that out in the beginning. And then once you understand that, then the technical controls are going to need to be implemented from there. So we talked about this is critical data examples. These examples are going to be touching either customer data or critical business data. So one of the components, obviously all the things I already talked about still apply greatly.
Okay.
Proper build, make sure we're watching now when these things actually start running and the runtime risks. But one of the things that will come into play in these highly regulated, highly critical environments where we're going to try and have agents be a part of the story is human in the loop. Human in the loop processes built into how your agent runs is one of the main controls that has been called out for any organization who is dealing with critical data. That means you cannot have an agent that is fully autonomous. That's
And
really what that means at its core.
And why not? Why not? I mean, what kind of problems does it introduce? What kind of problems do you hear about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I make a comment on that
Go
one,
ahead.
Kayla?
Sure.
Because you mentioned it, and I was like, I'm thinking of my pharmaceutical companies. Some of the one of the use cases that you mentioned, Amberji, was using agents to look at research or potential candidates for developing a drug or developing a trial, right? And then Kayla talked about something like prompt injection, where we're seeing, people that may send you a spam email actually write instructions for an agent to go and perform, right? So if I'm a pharma company and I'm taking a look at candidates for a new drug, like you would want to put in an approval that before you share that information out with anybody, somebody has to agree that the information needs to go out, because that is your IP. You don't want it to be hijacked by somebody that has bad intent and take that out of your organization. So it's important that you put in somebody has to go in to check before further action needs to be taken. That could be a lot riskier to the organization. And then the other thing that I think I would highlight in what Kayla was mentioning about the use case, right? There are certain use cases that may not be ready for agents yet, right? And I'm thinking again back into my medtech companies where they have to comply with GXP. We have to prove that you're taking action consistently to produce a drug that is consistent no matter where it's made or and it's following the same process, and you're monitoring that consistency. So some of those use cases may not be ready for agentic yet, whereas use cases within, maybe your human resources would give you more value and less risk. So those are just comments there again on where the use case, what you're building, really decides how much security and what security you need to put in place, and the criticality of the human in the loop to protect that data.
Yeah, for sure, Liz. And I also add there that it really is highly highly recommended that you be really critical about these use cases, like you said. I mean, there's plenty of conversations I've been in with folks who are in those regulated industries where the reality is, it's like, look, if AI is not the solution today for you, today, like, don't jump the gun on that, because the security components, the regulations, the guardrails are going to be really important, and those are going to evolve. They're going to evolve. They're going to catch up. There will be a day where we won't have to depend on the human in the loop. But as of right now, that is one of the best controls that's been identified by regulators and standards bodies to be able to make sure that this is as controlled as we possibly can. So yeah, that's a really, really key point. And then one of the other things I would just add in there is like reducing the attack surface of your agent. So if we're giving these things tools, they have tools to be able to do the job, do it more effectively, limit, especially if we're talking about critical environments, right? That's part of the focus. Limit the tools that the agent has access to only what's necessary. We know that as principle of least privilege. We know that for a lot of building components, but this is a big one for agents as well, especially in a highly regulated, highly controlled environment. Like, make sure you're building your agent to be as basic as possible, and then making sure that it's running on a grounded model, so you're reducing your hallucination, and you don't. If you don't want all the generative capabilities, you just want it to use the information, the knowledge you've given it, make sure you make those as setting choices. So it's just assessing what you really need it to do in the environment it's going to operate in, and then build it accordingly.
Awesome. Thank you. So from, I know I've asked this question in a different way before, but if you were to kind of summarize, right, maybe a bulleted list of 5 or 6 items, how do healthcare organizations start with the journey to secure their agentic AI? Just, dumb it down for me.
Yeah, the basic components, right? So highly regulated, we care about that a lot, right? So let's make sure we're putting ourselves in a place for future success as we're building these strategies out today. So you need to have an acceptable use policy for the building and the use of agentic AI. You need to have an asset inventory, a plan to ensure accurate asset inventory. Set that as a precedent in the beginning of this journey for your organization. If you build it, you will document it. Approved technical build standards. These are the things you can and cannot enable with this thing. Make sure you have basic threat models.
I think we may have lost
Your security org. Oh, sorry, am I back?
Yeah, we heard
Yes.
threat models.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm in a different place right now, so not home. So I apologize for my network connectivity here. But okay, collaboration, right? I'll just keep it at that. You might have to collaborate with other security teams to do something like a threat model on your use cases. Totally cool. That's actually how you can help build in those relationships with those teams. Make sure you have your remediation strategy set before you start getting vulnerabilities rolling in. Who is going to be handling what fixes and how. So set that remediation strategy. And then also for further on down the line, make sure you're working with security again in disciplines like incident response. making sure that your security team that runs those types of practices is aware of what you're building and how you're building it so that they can incorporate that for their own practices. So, I mean, that's on my short list, I think, for what the team needs to do here.
I think that's a great start. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, and I think, Kayla is a security expert. She's been in the space for a long time, and she's giving us her perspective from that lens. I think if I were to look at it from the lens of, the customers that are working with low code tools and they're thinking about this, right? For me, it's like step number one is you should make sure that you have your build time policies, your security governance, access, all that. You have that strategy put in place. If you haven't, it's something I would say it's square number one. You start there. And then I would also say step two is really try to understand what your security team is doing. Begin to partner with them. Like, do you know who they are? Do you know what work they're doing? What I'm seeing with some of my customers is that often the security team is already looking into this, right? And they may already have a perspective, but you need to really build a partnership with them, share what you're doing so they can take some of that, their strategy, and apply it to what you're doing and really, really give you a holistic security approach for build time, runtime that you can apply to enabling these tools in your organization. But I think those are like the very next steps. Building a strategy takes a lot of effort, but I think reaching out and creating that relationship, if you don't have it with your security team, are going to be crucial moving forward.
That makes a lot of sense, Liz. Thank you. And for either of you, Kayla, Liz, what are some of the resources that are available to the folks who are listening to this webinar?
Well, so just to throw out a few of them from the security perspective, obviously, because we're talking about building these things in a very specific in the Microsoft environment, leaning in on what Microsoft is saying is a best practice is obviously a great place to start. And then as you broaden the horizon, which Liz and Abhijit, if you guys have other things to throw in there, please do. But broadening the security lens, there's efforts like the OWASP which is an application security group. It's open source group. They have a threat modeling guide specifically for agentic AI. It's a great introduction to how agents work and the risks related to them. That is a really good resource to know a little bit more about kind of where that security mindset is when we're talking about what threats we see from agents. And then there are other really great resources from some of the like standalone agent organizations who are, they're more building or releasing the technology for like professional software developers who are building these super niche use cases from the ground up. And there's a lot of guidance around what is an agent and the threats we see there too. So there's a lot of resources in the world of like what's an agent. And then the OWASP one, I think, is just a great resource for the security landscape.
No, this is super helpful and really, really informative. I learned a lot. I'm checking my chat and I don't think we have any questions from the audience. Maybe give it about 10 more seconds and see if any last minute questions pop up. If not, then Kayla and Liz, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, to educate us. Greatly appreciated. And I think we have some clear next steps. And I think I'm going to turn this over to Grayson and Connor, who are the actual owners of the meeting, to see if they have any closing remarks.
Nothing from me. Just wanted to say thanks everybody for joining, and we will follow up with a recording of today's session, and appreciate the speakers as well. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.